What's going on, everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at the all-new Miyoo A30, and this is one that I've actually been waiting on for a little while. I love the Miyoo Mini, definitely an awesome pocketable device, but a lot of people have been wanting a horizontal version of that, and basically that's what we've got here. Coming in with a bit of a smaller screen at 2.8 inches, but overall I really do like the design. They're offering this in a couple different color variants, and I've got the just black version here, which I think looks really good. And of course, we've seen other companies release these small form factor horizontal handhelds recently, like the RG28, and that's going to be the biggest competitor here. Now, I completely understand that not everybody is into these really small handhelds, but these are great for carrying around with you basically anywhere you go. And with the Miyoo A30, they did add an analog stick here. It's a smaller switch style, given the form factor of this unit, but it works out great for the size here. All of the face buttons have conductive pads underneath them, and they feel pretty good. The buttons on this and the D-pad are much larger than the ones on the RG28, and that was kind of a big complaint from a lot of people with that unit. We do have those inner shoulder buttons, so we do have to kind of reach over those triggers, and there's really no way around it unless they put those on the rear, and we haven't seen any manufacturers with these horizontal handhelds do that yet. Right off the bat, D-pad does feel pretty decent. Again, we've got a conductive pad under here. It's a little looser than I'd like it to be, and I'm not sure if it's just this unit here or not, but we will be doing some testing by the end of this video. Now, when it comes to performance with this unit, we will be testing out a few things, but these are not made for high-end emulators, and we've got a lot of handhelds on the market that can run exactly what this can run. And I think that's kind of been a big problem in this retro handheld market, given that, we've seen a few new chipsets here and there. Really, making a decision is going to come down to the final price, software, and the look and feel. Of course, a lot of this will be personal preference if you're looking to get a handheld at this price point, and I'm sure we're going to see more launch here. Really depends on how the A30 and the RG28 do with both of those companies who have released these recently. But taking a look over the unit, down here we've got a single micro SD card slot. Over here on the right hand side, dual LED indicators plus our power button. And of course, moving around top, we've got our volume rocker, USB Type-C, menu button, and our shoulder and triggers. I wanted to give you a quick size comparison between a few of these smaller form factor handhelds. On the far left, we've got the Miyoo Mini. On the top, we've got that RG28. As you can see, all three of these are very small form factor. And really, when it comes down to it, the A30 and the RG28 are basically the same size, but we do get those larger face buttons and a larger D-pad on that A30. So if that's something you definitely need, then this one might be for you. And both of these handhelds are using a 2.8-inch IPS display, but the brightness on that A30 is way under what that RG28 can put out. And since the brightness on that RG is much greater, viewing angles are a lot better on the RG. And when it comes to the overall specs of the A30, for the CPU, they opted to use the all-winner A33. This is quad-core A7 ARM SoC. We've got a Mali 400 MP2 GPU, 512 megabytes of RAM, a 2.8-inch IPS display at 640 by 480. This also has 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi built in, which comes in really handy for net play sessions. And this is running Linux, just like the Miyoo Mini is. Moving over to the operating system, up front here we've got our recents, favorites, games, and from games, this is just going to give us a list of all of the systems that are compatible with this unit. And even though we have like PSP and N64 listed here, it doesn't mean that it's going to run every single game at full speed. I've tested a few PSP and N64 games, and it is a bit hit or miss on this A33 CPU. And it's kind of the same thing when it comes to Dreamcast, but if you're looking to do Game Boy, GBA, NES, Super Nintendo, this has got you covered, no problem at all. We've also got our RetroArch section, which is going to allow us to launch each individual core. We can go directly into RetroArch also and change that out if we want to. So yeah, we do have full access to RetroArch. And of course, we've got our settings here. Brightness is at 10 right now, and like I showed you, that RG just has a much brighter display. We've also got some color options that we can mess around with, which is really great. And when I first got into this menu, I saw that illumination section. Unfortunately, it just kind of washes it out. It does make it brighter, but it's just not a clean brightness. You can change the system language, and we've got calibration. So I did have to use this when I first got into the system. My analog stick was a little all over the place, but as soon as I went in here and recalibrated it, no problem since. Joypad test, and this does go right back to center once you're done with it. At least after I calibrated it. I actually didn't look at this before I went through the calibration process, which is very simple. Moving down a bit more, we can remap all of the buttons here. Wi-Fi for net play, so it's only 2.4 gigahertz, but you can connect right up. Got some themes, and we've got our CPU frequency. With the default setting, not exactly sure how far it goes up, but we've got an 816 setting, 1200, and 1.4 gigahertz setting. I personally don't notice much of a difference with the higher end emulators from default up to that 1.4 setting, so I think default is kind of taking us all the way up there. But moving down the list a bit more, we've got USB storage and so on and so on. Now, one thing I do like about these devices are all the themes that you can actually install. Now, this came with a bunch pre-installed, but the community makes a lot of these themes, and most of them look really good. But I'm going to be sticking with the default theme that came pre-installed here. Most of these are darker themes, but you can go with a light theme if you wanted to kind of brighten everything up in the menu. As for the overall UI, very easy to use, and I mean, if you've never used one of these handhelds in the past and were handed this, you could navigate right to the game section, start up a game in no time. The first thing I wanted to do here was test out this D-pad, and I am using a Dreamcast game right now with the Flycast core. We've got Capcom versus SNK, and it's not bad. I did miss a few here and there. It's a bit looser than I'd like. Not a lot of spring back, but the roll on this thing is really good. And yeah, I'm glad that they didn't use a really tiny D-pad on this. That's one of my complaints about the RG28. Kind of wish they would have went with a full size. Now the D-pad on that does work great, but you know, if you've got larger hands, it's just a bit hard to get to. Not raised up too much, and it's got that little divot in the middle, which does allow you to kind of hold on to this thing and roll it really nicely. One of my favorite systems to run on these handhelds is GBA, and with any of these systems, we've actually got the menu button up top. Now, if you're using a standalone emulator, it's going to give us a bit of a different menu here, but we can save and load, or we can go to our native menus. Since I'm using RetroArch for GBA, it'll bring us right into RetroArch, and we've got full access there. So if you did want to turn on a frame counter, add some scan lines, you could easily do it from RetroArch. And when it comes to GBA performance, we've got more than enough power here. D-pad feeling really nice, and it's very reminiscent of something like a Game Boy Micro. Now it is a bit bigger, but you know, having that pocketable size there, being able to play thousands of retro games is really awesome. And the chipset they opted to use here, the all-winner A33, is more suited for those lower-end emulators. NES, SNES, Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, PC Engine, handles Neo Geo, CPS 1, 2, and 3 really well. But now I wanted to move up just a bit because it is advertised as being able to do Dreamcast, N64, and PSP. Here we have some Dreamcast using the Flycast core, Crazy Taxi 2, and you know, getting to that gas button is a bit cumbersome, so I should probably remap these. But as you can see, this is not at full speed, and that's really going to be the case with the harder to emulate Dreamcast games. Now, when we were taking a look at some D-pad testing, I was actually using the same core with a 2D fighting game, and it ran just fine on this system. So definitely keep that in mind. There are some Dreamcast games that this is going to struggle with, even with a lot of frame skip on. Next up, we've got some PS1 emulation, and initially when I started up Tekken 3, it was skipping a bit. It did have to go into RetroArch and enable auto frame skip, but once I did that, it cleared everything up, and PS1 is really playable on the A30. Next, we've got some N64 emulation, and I'll tell you, it's actually working out better than I thought it would on this chipset. It's not perfect by any means, and there are games that are still going to struggle on this little A33 chipset, but throughout, Star Fox, Diddy Kong Racing, Mario Kart, and Rampage, all running pretty decently. Overall, I do like the design, look, and feel of the Miyoo A30. I think it's a really sleek little handheld that'll slip right in your pocket. Having that analog stick is really awesome, and the D-pad here could use a little work. I think it just needs to be a bit tighter, but you know, that's kind of personal preference. I was able to pull off my special moves, play platformers on this thing. Buttons on the front here work just like they should. They are using conductive pads. Having that extra analog stick does come in handy for some higher end systems, but that's where the main issue comes in for the A30, those higher end systems. For the longest time now, we've seen a ton of handhelds hit the market, these smaller retro handhelds powered by ARM chips that can emulate the same thing across the board. The A30 is using the all-winner A33, which has been on the market for a little while. We've seen a couple other handhelds with this chipset, and again, I mean, it can emulate the old stuff just fine. PC Engine, Neo Geo, CPS, SNES, Mega Drive, Master System, all of those lower end systems are going to run great on the A30, but I wouldn't pick this up specifically for Dreamcast, N64, and PSP emulation, just like a lot of the other handhelds on the market right now. And the A30 is coming in at around the same exact price point as the RG28, so that $50 mark right there, give or take a few dollars depending on the coupon. And to tell you the truth, if I had to choose between the two, I would definitely go with the RG28. It's got a more powerful chipset, which is going to allow us to do Dreamcast, N64, and PSP a bit better. It's also got a brighter screen. I just like the screen on that RG28 as opposed to the A30. Plus, it's got HDMI out. But in the end, all of these handhelds really come down to playing those older systems. That's what they're great at. Now, I will tell you, I do like the overall look, feel, and design of the A30 over the RG28, but in the end, a lot of this is really going to come down to user preference. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you've got any questions, let me know in the comments, and if you're interested in learning a little more about the Miyoo A30, I'll leave some links down below. And like always, thanks for watching.